Hey guys, welcome back to World of Warships. Today we're taking a look at the new Tier 8 European battleship, Enigheten. I apologize for the pronunciation as always, but this is a very typical start to a European battleships game. You push up with your crazy good concealment to a cap to support your team, and you radar the destroyer. The utility here is wild. Even at Tier 8, we do get 2 radars here instead of the 3 radars like we see on the Tier 9 and the Tier 10. But that's still more than enough to impact the battle massively. 10-kilometer radar here with a 25-second action time base, which of course we're using the radar mod as well to help us out a little bit. And this poor Groningen is back to port already. So an incredibly impactful Tier 8 in this Tier 10 battle. You are essentially the battle cruiser or cruiser role in these Tier 10 games in the double up tier, except you're a tanky radar that can actually push up to a lot of these islands without having to worry about that overmatch, long range sort of thing that cruisers typically have to deal with. It is incredibly strong. And then you still have battleship shells, which, assuming your dispersion cooperates, can do some incredible damage. Here with this Tier 8 as well as the Tier 9 in this line, we get pretty slow shell velocity. That is a big difference to the Tier 10 Thor that we looked at. But that can be a benefit here, allowing us to arc over this island just barely and hopefully finishing off a very scary Tier 10 threat in Hawaii. It's very nice to have that slow shell velocity when you're pushing up to islands, which I think you should be doing with this line. Getting into the fight, getting into these engagements, and using your radar to help your team win a lot of these early destroyer engagements, radar out enemy cruisers that are playing in their smoke screens, that kind of thing. It is extremely powerful to have this extra utility on a rather tanky battleship line. The more I've played with this line, the more I've been impressed with how long they can survive. Yes, it's got low HP. In fact, this one has the lowest HP of all Tier 8 battleships. And yet, it is still very tanky. This one still gets a 40mm deck armor. The poor American battleships in their 38mm deck armor has been a little bit power crept. A lot of HE shells, airstrikes coming into the game that have been able to pen 38mm. Something like mines and Bremen guns can pen 38mm. Not so here. We have 40mm deck armor alongside 50mm upper belt armor, and a small superstructure, at least when it comes to this Tier 8. So a very, very difficult ship to deal a ton of damage to. Broadside on, it does have a citadel at waterline with some spaced armor, which seems typical for this line at this point, which makes it a very, very tough ship to deal damage to, if you can even keep it spotted. 11.2 kilometers of detect on this battleship with 9 381mm main guns. These are the same guns that you're going to find on the Tier 9 as far as their damage, shell velocity, and dispersion. 1.8 Sigma battleship dispersion here. The main difference is going to be the reload. This one feels more like a battleship in its reload department. 26.5 second reload. Although that's still quite solid for a Tier 8 battleship with 9 guns. Something like North Carolina, which does have 406s, mind you, does get a normal 30-second reload. If we compare to a 380mm battleship here, like Tirpitz, for example, that one gets a 26-second reload. So only half a second worse, and you gain 1 more gun. That's pretty interesting, with higher alpha damage, because this ship is getting some changes on release that I unfortunately did not get to play with. And one of those was the alpha damage increase. It goes from 11,400 alpha damage all the way up to 12,100. So pretty nice. Goes from being mediocre for 380mm alpha damage on the AP to some of the best 380mm alpha damage on that armor piercing. A little more in line of what the Tier 10 and those 406s with some very high alpha damage feel like, although not with that shell velocity. Considering all of our armor, we can brawl pretty well. And of course, we have those torpedoes for any last-minute ramming attempts. Do you think that these torps have been nerfed compared to the Tier 10 variant? If you said no, you would be mostly correct. The range is the only thing that's really different, as well as slight speed decrease compared to the Tier 10. You get 4 of these per side, and they still do 17,500 alpha damage. Wild stuff. Alongside DD dispersion, wargaming. Surely, I know you're probably never going to admit to this or tell me this, but I would love to know if there's some built-in bonus dispersion buff when we're firing at destroyers, because that was disgusting. Battleship dispersion 1.8 sigma, never. Okay, I'm going to say it never looks that good. I don't know what happened there. Regardless, we're on to Brawling a Baltimore, and I'll show you the armor profile later, but it's kind of hilarious when you go bow in with this ship against enemy cruisers. There's not a lot that they can actually damage, unless they can pen 32, which Balti does. He's going for a superstructure, though. The turrets are quite massive on this ship and cover a lot of that superstructure, especially if we're bow in. Here, going broadside now, and that is going to be citadels. If it wasn't, yeah, the torps would definitely finish him off. Having torpedoes in brawls is so valuable. One, you can save it for those ramming attempts. Two, you can use it to guarantee you don't eat those unfortunate overpens that cruisers sometimes tend to eat. And of course, we can prevent enemy ships from playing in such a way where they could take us out. Cleveland wins this fight if he greeds for his rear turrets while I'm on a reload. If he does that, my torps are going to hit him. So he turns in to avoid the torpedoes. He doesn't have enough DPM to finish us off before our guns are reloaded. And at this point, he's so low that a few overpens will take him out. It's pretty cool the amount of strategies you can incorporate in a brawl when you have torpedoes. It's really fun. And also when you have a radar, okay? Just having information of where enemy ships are before you round a corner or something like that, before you decide to push in, is hugely influential. We also are able to play these flanks, like I was looking at with Gustav a little bit more. It's difficult to push into this. How do you keep it spotted? You only have a 1.2 kilometer window where you can spot this ship as a destroyer and not get radared back in return. That's difficult to deal with. We also get some pretty awesome torpedo power, giving you that 12 kilometers of range. Not 15, unfortunately, but you could still stealth torp a little bit here. And very, very powerful damage on these torpedoes. So throw them out into choke points, throw them out across caps. That's why I wanted to include that in first clip as well, where we're dealing with the Groningen. Our torps reload pretty quickly, so just throw them out across the cap early game. The timing is pretty much perfect for those enemy destroyers to be sitting in their smoke, trying to finish up capping the point for those torpedoes to land. We're going to send some torps towards this choke point here where the Monarch is pushing here soon. And this is another great way to utilize these torpedoes, is just look for common choke points, common areas people like to push, or where people like to poke out around islands to do a bit of damage, and then maybe reverse back into cover. You can sometimes catch people off guard that way. 12 kilometers torps will be surprising a lot of people with this ship, as well as gaining you a bit of consistency. Monarch decides to go a bit broadside. I aim too high, certainly, but that dispersion didn't look very good now, did it either? The torpedoes, though, those don't overpen. Don't get any ideas, Wargaming. That would be horrible if torps overpen. Fortunately, that does finish off that Monarch. Imagine torpedoes overpenning. Yikes, that would be bad. Pushing in here again, torping a common choke point, and we're going to see again the value of slower shells here, allowing us to maybe arc over this island and hit this Aegir. I mentioned it towards the end of the Gustav video, but I need to mention it here too. I don't understand why the AA is so bad on these lower tier battleships, anything that's not the tier 10, really. We have 5 flak on this ship and essentially no DPS for the continuous damage. It's surprising to me. When I think of European ships, like Holland Line, for example, it seems like one of their gimmicks is that there's just strong AA for the tier, and that just does not seem to be the case. So if you're deciding to push in, trying to get your radar active in these battles like I am, and there's a carrier in the game, or maybe airstrikes coming after you, you're gonna have a bad time, okay? Especially in the tier 8 and 9. Maybe in the tier 10, the flak will do enough for you, but certainly not as you're grinding the line, which, by the way, you should be grinding this line when it comes out in 2 months. We do have this early access period. This ship will be available in those sequential bundles for tokens. I'm not sure yet how many tokens or how long it's going to take to grind out the tokens to get the tier 8. Usually with these early access periods, maybe you're getting the tier 8 at most. Oftentimes it's the tier 7 or the tier 6 you can grind for free, and then the rest you got to pay a lot for. Slower shells can sometimes mean, yeah, the enemy ships can just sneak past you and get behind cover. So there's some upsides and downsides. Generally, better shell velocity is going to be a little bit stronger. I want to talk a little more about this radar, though, at Tier 8 specifically. Because if we include all these Tier 8 battleships and some of the cruisers as well, there's a lot of radars at Tier 8. Things like Borodino, maybe. 25-second radar as well, except that one, you get 3 charges, and it's a 12-kilometer radar with a faster cooldown. Constellation, 10-kilometer radar as well, but 30 seconds this time with a faster cooldown, as well as 3 charges. So at Tier 10, this line is easily the best, or close to the best, for radar at its tier. Really, Rhode Island's the only competition there. Tier 9, you got things like Missouri. Like, there's some, but not a lot. Tier 8, there's a couple, actually, competing. Certainly, those other two, Constellation and Borodino, are nowhere near as tanky as this, all right? Borodino has massive compromises in its armor profile, as well as just the damage output. You only get 6 guns on that one. We all know how I feel about 6-gun battleships, or if you don't, I do not value their inconsistency very highly, unfortunately. And Constellation, it's a bit of a brick, right? It's like a Lexington Hull or something like that. It also eats so much damage. And those also don't get the concealment like this Tier 8 does. So extremely valuable to have this tanky radar that allows us to push up, get a ton of information on where the enemy is while our destroyer's smoked up, dealing damage. We can spot for them, as well as see if there's any incoming threats as far as torp destroyers go. Or maybe that's submarine pushing towards us. And this is all to say without mentioning the engine boost. Another feature of this line is a 25% engine boost. Random torps across the gap actually hit, by the way. That was into the Shimanto there. Just send them out, bro. Across the gap, cross common choke points. You're going to be surprised about the number of torp hits you actually get. But back to this engine boost, it's so valuable, especially on this one, because there's another buff that's coming to this ship on release that I did not get to play with. It has some of the worst turning deceleration I've ever seen. It slows down so quickly the instant I touch my rudder. So this engine boost is helping me to maybe dodge the Brandenburg torps that are coming through. You won't have to deal with that, though. I don't know exactly what the acceleration values are going to on release, but I would assume it's going to feel a lot more like Gustav, rather than where you turn and you instantly slow down like a ton. Like a bit like Lanzhou, the Battle Pass cruiser from the second half of the Christmas update. But look at us easily able to turn over and avoid those torps from Brandenburg at like 4 kilometers. That kind of acceleration and maneuverability too. This ship has a crazy turning radius of 790 meters, base 14.2 second rudder. And with rudder mod, it gets even faster, right? When I have this engine boost available, I don't feel like I need to run propulsion mod all the time. So it gives me even better maneuverability. We have close to that battle cruiser feeling level maneuverability, assuming they change the acceleration well in a turn. But that maneuverability and concealment comes with way better armor. Notice the Z46 here, not spotted by our radar in the gap there. So that gives me the green light to go rush this Musashi. Sure, we don't have a hydro to deal with the torpedoes as we're pushing in, but you know what's maybe better than a hydro for dealing with destroyers as you're pushing in? A 10-kilometer radar that lets you know exactly where they are and exactly where they're torping from, or where they're not, that they're not around to support this Musashi while I round this corner to torp rush him. It's so incredible to have that level of utility. So the downsides of this line, definitely the 1.8 Sigma Battleship Dispersion, which, if you roll well, can give you dispersion like that. That gives us some very nice damage. If you roll poorly, it's going to bracket ships all the time. It'll be inconsistent, but the reload certainly can make up for that. The extra utility we gain over every other battleship, essentially, in the game with that radar is very nice. Our armor profile is even better than most battleships at our tiers, too. It leads to a ship line that is taking a lot of rolls from a lot of the other ships already in the game. This one can tank with the best of them for brief periods of time. If you're consistently spotted, that low HP pool can be a disadvantage. Certainly if you eat torpedoes, torp protection here is very, very bad at only 22%. But if you're not eating torps and you shouldn't be getting spotted that often, if you don't want to be because of the crazy detection, how do you deal with this? And it brings that utility that cruisers are usually having with that radar. Yeah, we don't have the DPM to finish off those destroyers, but that extra level of spotting or just bringing one more radar to a flank that doesn't take up a cruiser slot, that is incredibly powerful. And just to have the ability to sit bow in these situations and not be too worried about taking a ton of damage through our bow or something like that. It still feels like these ships should have battlecruiser type armor where the bow and stern sections are overmatchable, much like Rhode Island does have that problem. Most battlecruisers have that problem. They have decent deck armor, they have decent upper belt armor for their tier, but it's the extremities, at closer ranges. They don't just tank through battleships and get those torpedoes off at closer ranges. This one can easily do that. I also should talk about the firing angles because that was a key weakness on the Gustav. But here, 37 degrees forward, 36 degrees backwards. So not as good as we saw with the Thor on both forward and rear firing angles, but certainly a lot better at kiting angles than the Gustav, which was like 44 or something like that. Much, much worse kiting angles. This one is quite comfortable to play bow in or kiting. I think probably you want to play it more bow in on islands because we have that extra utility and radar we need to take advantage of. And you can just stay bow in and go dark most of the time, since 11.2 kilometer detect is so easy to go dark on. Yeah, 3 overpens into the broadside chart. It trolls, okay? That is the downside of this line, is you can't rely on its dispersion. But if that's the only downside, that's kind of incredible because you reload quickly enough, especially at the higher tiers, where it gets more of that battle cruiser level of reload, that you don't have to worry about that quite so much. Crazy line, crazy powerful, and well worth grinding out in 2 months when it comes out of early access, because this is a strong tier 8. The tier 9 is incredible as well. This is not a situation of free XP your way to tier 10, which I'm glad to see. Although that does leave me a little concerned about the power creep in this game. We'll see how that goes. Certainly the dispersion is an issue here, and we'll see if that is enough to keep these in line, and if the survivability is maybe worse than I think. I am pretty good at pushing in, I'd like to think. I try to push in a lot of the time, so I'm pretty used to the scenarios where I know I can do pretty well, and which ones maybe I should stay away from. So maybe that is skewing the survivability a little bit. But I do think these are very survivable battleships still. I mean, look at the armor on this ship, especially the bow-in armor. What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? Okay, if you can't pen 32 millimeters, which a lot of tier 8 cruisers can't. I mean, light cruisers in particular. Some of the heavy cruisers can, but they certainly lack in DPM at that tier. You're aiming for this? I mean, this is armored. This is armored. The turrets are blocking. That's tough. That is tough to deal with. And then even if you do end up getting the side, the superstructure here is not big. This is a small ship already, and the superstructure is quite low and not very large either. And that is indeed a 40 millimeter deck armor and a 50 millimeter upper belt armor. Wow, very difficult to actually deal damage to this ship. If it goes broadside, that does mean it's going to arm a lot of armor piercing shells, which is a good thing if you're fighting this. But it's probably not going to be sitting broadside. Given the firing angles and then it can just kind of sit bow in, it's going to be difficult to find those opportunities. If it goes broadside and you're in a battleship or maybe in a battle cruiser or something like that, you will be able to sometimes get that Citadel. It's very waterline though. Waterline Citadel with some spaced armor, 280 plus 40. You know, spaced armor in this game leads to some weird jank and some situations where this should take damage and it just simply doesn't. And I need to try some more HE with these ships, I know, but I tried a little bit here with this one. Gustav and with the 381 millimeter main guns, the alpha damage is fine at 5100, still 1,000 less alpha than like Monarch, for example, but that's an extreme example of HE. This is still decent alpha damage, but the problem is that fire chance. 25% fire chance on battleship shells is not amazing for consistently relighting those fires. At least that's how I have found. So it feels kind of bad to do 3,000 to 5,000 damage per salvo with your HE, unless you get some good dispersion, which happens from time to time. The inconsistency is still there. I'd really rather just find those broadsides and go after them. With our concealment, we can afford to wait a little bit, get into a better position without anyone knowing, and then surprise someone's broadside. It's kind of how I've been enjoying playing this ship more so. Torpedoes add a ton of consistency at closer ranges and even into choke points, across gaps, into cap zones. These are very, very good. 12 kilometer torpedoes, 17,500 alpha damage. I mean, some destroyers struggle to get this level of HP. There's saturation and stuff. You're not always going to get full damage out of your torps, of course, but some tier 8 DDs don't get to that level of HP. And imagine you just eat one of those, you're just done. A battleship torp. Very, very powerful. Detection as well, 11.2. 11.4 second rudder shift here with rudder mod, and that turning circle rate is very good. Once they buff that acceleration on release, which you guys will play with, this is only for the test ship period before the update goes out for me to deal with, but that acceleration slowdown, the speed slowdown in a turn was quite painful. If they had left it like that, that would be a key weakness certainly, but they're buffing that, so it will no longer be a weakness that you have to deal with using emergency engine power. So 25% engine boost for 105 seconds here. Very powerful consumable to get you out of bad situations, whether that be you need to run away quickly, like in the Gustav video from the Libertad there, or if you just need to a quick burst of speed to accelerate you out of the way of some torps, like against the Brandenburg in this video. Very, very handy consumable to have. But a low HP pool, maybe that's enough to balance it. Maybe the dispersion is enough to balance it. I guess we'll see. I mean, here's the consumable layout that I was running with radar mod. That gets us up to that 30-second radar, which is very, very useful. And concealment, aiming systems, of course. And I've been going damage control party mod since the torpedoes do get knocked out quite a bit without main armaments mod, but they always tend to come back. And it's not like we need the torps all the time. That's not our main armament. They're just kind of a nice to have. And on this one, you can see the little cubby here. It's a little bit more protected than on the tier 10. That whole shot trapping issue that the tier 10 has, the tier 8 and the tier 9 certainly don't struggle with that quite so much, because there is this little bit of plate on top of it, so that'll bounce some shells more if you're sitting in an angle like this. Where the tier 10, that's a big issue. When you sit angled enough to use your main guns, front and back, this is very flat, and it's very easy to eat a ton of damage into that angle. It's a strong line, guys. It's a strong line. Still early days. Got to play with them some more. The more I've played with them, the tankier they feel, the stronger they feel at pushing up early and getting insane value out of that radar into caps early game. That wins you. That just simply wins you flanks. Getting that radar and caps early wins you flanks. It's so powerful. And the dispersion gets more annoying as I play with it more too. There's a little bit less of giving it the benefit of the doubt and trying a new line and just seeing that, oh, my dispersion's not very consistent here. For me personally, that gets a little annoying. And so I think that's going to be, for me, why I may not play these quite so much. But it's still early days. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.